jam. You the cover not too slow, right? For not so homo, just getting on the cover, no thing.
Hey, Savages and sports fans, welcome to Greg Medford Show. Greg here, coming at you from the corner of the factory in Phoenix, Arizona. What's going on? We are in our continuing, I call it the Milk Stool series. As many of you have heard, the three legs of the milk stool for this all to work. A higher power endowed populace that gives up a sliver of its freedoms to an elected body we can kick out of office to kind of help run things and put battleships in the water. Those are the two legs of the milk stool. The third leg of the milk stool is a free and independent press with a little mirror and a bullhorn reflecting back on everybody what they're doing. Talking to the population and speaking truth to power. Now, the free and independent press doesn't do that. They've failed miserably. Why? Well, because they need certificates and they need degrees from these universities that are all connected to these government institutions, and they all want to get invited to the National Press Corps party. And they want to get invited to the White House so they can be on the daily news instead of having to go find their scoop. So because they're generally lazy, now they're just propagandists. Reporting used to be this kind of gumshoe detective, bare knuckles, blue collar thing, and it's turned into a snooty upper class, I don't know, kind of an affectation of the elite. It's because it's their pet. It's their little pet project. How can they inform the masses and propagandize the masses so they can do whatever they want? That's what's happened. Whatever happened to the gumshoe, standing there with a notepad, with a notepad in everybody's nose, pushing them. That's gone. The best news job in the country is the Washington desk at the White House. You don't have to go out and do any of that knuckle drag anymore. You just show up every day and the president tells you what's cool. You get to walk back or you get to be on national news asking the questions, raising your hand up. But now everything's a collusion between the extreme upper class and the upper class elitist group of reporters. So what are we going to do? It's, 97% of people in the original 13 colonies and in the early Americas wanted to be British. 3% wanted to be free. That's what being a 3%er is. 3% wanted to participate in independence from England. 3%. And as it turns out, it's still the same. About 3% of us want to be free. So we joined the Marine Corps and we joined the 82nd and the 101st and joined the Navy SEALs. We joined Delta. Joined the PJs. Go fly fighter jets. Projectile force. And once you get out and your young man's vim and vigor is over, what do you do now? And this is what you do sometimes. First time in world history. You can just put a little studio together, throw up some cameras, get some cool mics, and invite in guests and have the American discussion. So here we are having it today. John Arnold is joining us. He's an Arizona businessman, citizen, and from the Midwest. You're from the Midwest, right?
Yep, correct.
Yep, Midwesterner out here in Arizona, a transplant to our wild, dusty, squinty-eyed West. Here running for State House Legislative District number 4. We're going to talk about some issues today. I'm going to push him a little bit because we've just met, and I'm going to push him a little bit and see what kind of answers and resolve I can get from him on some of the things that are the pressing issues of the day from my little corner of the world. These are going to be the same issues that are pressing you if you're in Muskogee or if you're in Tampa or if you're in New York City. If you live in some kooky liberal bastion of America where your money doesn't matter, like you're up in Marin County where everyone's basically suckled off the teat of capitalism and then they turn into a bunch of luxury Marxists because they're internal liars. If you live in that place and your money doesn't matter, toss some money around in the politics that do matter because there's swayable places everywhere. And this is one of those swayable places. Hey, welcome to the show. How you doing, John?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. So, running for LD4.
Yes, sir.
When did you decide to run for LD4?
About a year ago. I looked around, looked at this race. Redistricting was coming up. I've got 4 kids that are age 12, 9, and 5.
You got twins?
Twin girls. Yep.
Oh my goodness.
I'll get to this in a sec. One of them's a swimmer, pretty competitive swimmer, and so you can imagine swimming and sexual confusion, I'll call it, within the swimming collegiate world. Not on my watch, but we'll get to that, I'm sure, at some point. But father of four, and I love my country and I love liberty, and I just made a decision. I could have those four kids know that their dad just talked about loving liberty, or I want them to know that I'm going to do something about it. And so that's why I decided to run. And that was a decision that was made about a year ago. I'm in it to win it. And so tomorrow, if you're listening to this show, you live in Scottsdale, Paradise Valley, Arcadia, Biltmore, Northeast Phoenix, you're in my district. And if you're listening to this show, there's a good chance you actually want to make sure you go to the ballots or go to the polls and actually vote. I'm talking to you today, and I hope that you hear my message, because my message is going to be one that is for liberty, freedom, and I think that I'll be the best candidate for freedom, liberty-loving patriots that are listening to the show today.
Let's, just for a little parenthetical, I believe it's Camelback Road, for those of you here in Phoenix, up to about Pinnacle Peak Parkway.
That's correct.
And then approximately 16th Street over to the 101.
Yeah, I call it, I say basically the 51 is the western edge and the 101 is the eastern edge.
That's
pretty close.
It's a big chunk of one of the most affluent parts of Arizona, for sure.
Yep, 247,000 people, 188,000 are voter age, and tomorrow with the primary, it's 75,000 registered Republicans, and of those 75,000, we expect a pretty big voter turnout. We've got a big, Senate race here in Arizona. We have a big governor's race here in Arizona. So we think we're going to get roughly somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 to 40,000 of those
participating
of the 75,000 registered Republicans. And I tell you what, Greg, it's been just eye-opening and heartwarming to see how many voters, because I've been working my ass off. I've been going out door to door, talking. I literally have talked to thousands of voters in the last 12 months in our district. And these are informed voters. This isn't, I think in the general, you get some voters that are there to vote for the top of the ticket, and then they kind of just pick a name on the lower end. But I tell you what, the people I've met, lower end of the ticket, which would be classified as my race, State House, these people know what they're talking about, and they're listening, and they want liberty.
The times are a-changing. When everything's running along hip, slick, and cool, people can kind of keep their nose in their own lane and stay in their own life and just kind of focus on keeping the garage clean and working with the kids,
Absolutely.
Right? But when things get crazy, modern intellectualism, which seems to be driving this country, has its head so far up its own ass, it doesn't connect to empiricism.
Right.
So we go, how do the elite keep making these decisions when we have millions of people running across the border? How do the elite keep making these decisions when we see our citizens dropping dead from fentanyl everywhere?
Right.
They're intellectuals, and their ideas and theories are disconnected from the observable experiential world. They're disconnected.
It's crazy. And let me address 2 points on what you just said there. Number one, our district is, my area is the best example of what you said of probably, I use the term complacency in the last 2 years. So, at the school board level, SUSD, I'm sure you heard the madness that's gone on there in the last 2 years. 2 years ago, I can tell you right now, I've friends, peers, people live in our district.
No idea.
Scottsdale, life is good, right? And hey, you know what? Schools are going to be great, and whoever's there in the school board.
They're thinking about their next Porsche, next BMW lease.
Life is good. And what happened during COVID? Boom. The curtain got pulled back. We got to see what was happening.
Yeah.
And, so that complacency, I think it was a massive, massive eye-opening experience to a ton of families within our district. So I think ultimately, a little pain here along the way, to move forward and get people to pay attention. Sometimes
I think it was a good thing.
You need to take a little pain to kind of move forward. I thought that was super interesting. But let me speak to the other part, the elites, which is, I think is unbelievably fascinating. So let's look at today's landscape of the common elite liberal. The liberals historically, both sides would agree to this, have controlled the media. I mean, go before Fox News. I mean, if you go before Fox News, they've controlled essentially the entire media. Early 90s. Education system, right? So that has been a liberal controlled industry for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Now what we're seeing, so those are big institutions that have been controlled by the liberals. Now we're seeing that the liberal elite class has gotten themselves into big corporations. That used to be Republican
That was
business.
the bastion of capitalists.
Right. It was Republican business, free enterprise. And I tell you what, I'm in the financial services industry, and I have a broker dealer that, again, should be business free enterprise. And they're pushing a woke agenda on us on a daily basis. It's really, really fascinating. And so now they're getting into that. So you're seeing that. I mean, obviously we know the Disney in Florida and so forth, and we're pushing back there. Take the big corporations, education, and the media, right? And guess what? We're gonna have a red wave come November. Besides all that, what's that tell you? What that tells you is exactly what you said, Greg. The people can think for themselves. I mean, the liberals just think. The average Democrat, should be so insulted. The average Democrat should be absolutely insulted with what their leadership thinks of their brains, because they basically just brainwash their own voter base to say it doesn't matter what we do. We're just going to tell you what to vote, and a lot of them do it.
They're their own echo chamber, and they're so disconnected. And the population has been. While everything's been great, the population kind of let this happen because we don't get to be, intellectuals are people who exist in a theoretical space and they never have to prove it anymore. That's the Enlightenment era, 1700, the 16th, 17th century. It was all about the rejection of mysticism. It was all about the rejection of mythology and faith-based thinking. It had to do with empiricism and observable universe and finding a way for the observable universe to match the worldview, what had been dominated by the church. But, as we decided that the earth wasn't the center of the universe and we were part of something bigger, our minds changed, right? So it was where science began to connect with belief so that our beliefs jive up with the observable universe. There's this new era where our beliefs are broken away from science, and it's where we have all these liberal arts majors, and we have all these universities that have been making all these liberal arts. And I was a liberal arts major, but I was also good at the hard sciences. They're disconnected from, for instance, the entire green agenda. If you look at it, it's actually not science-based. It's theory-based, not backed up by science, trying to answer some question that they believe in their little hearts. Right. It's not actual real science.
The goal is a transfer of power, in my opinion.
And it's just another attack on capitalism is all it is. But they don't know that. So you've got these agencies who support the green agenda, who are funded by the government, who wants the green agenda, so it has control so that it can make things cleaner. And then the people that run these organizations, I mean, no real hustler wants to go work for the federal government.
Right.
They want to get out in the free market and make some money and change the world. Well, the government doesn't change the world. It just grows. So you've got this negative feedback loop of people who go to the same universities, they drink the same Kool-Aid to go run the same organizations, and then the right people and you work your way into the leadership. And all I see on the horizon for the life of America is either death by our current path or death to the institutions which are trying to kill our country right now.
Yeah, like you said, it's a whole inside mix. A lot of East Coast Ivy Leagues where they go to the institutions, the higher end areas, graduate, they know somebody that knows somebody, and they get into whether it be big media, big Fortune 500, and that's where that loop goes on. I read this article one time that was just really eye-opening to me in terms of why, I always thought, why, and this has been for, over 100 years, why is that the education elitism in America is so far left? I just, why? I mean, you and I take it as we were born into it, basically. Like, that's just the way it was. And a really interesting thought process came across in that part is that back a long time ago, 100, 120 years, 130 years ago, the education elites did not like the fact that if you went to an average college town and you looked at who had the power in that town or who had the respect, or they'd go to a local, community organization, is that the Chamber of Commerce would celebrate, the business people in the area. The business people in the area would make twice, 3 times what the average professor was making in terms of income, which means that if you had a high academic professor going to the same type of social event as the best plumber in town, and the best plumber in town was making 3 times the income as the professor, they didn't like that. They didn't like the fact that you had private industry of what they thought as an elitist was, they looked down upon the average man or the average woman who was working hard, providing services for their community. And as a result, that's where some of these attacks come from, is they just resent essentially the private sector. And because if we go back to the old Roman Empire, it was a flip. It was the opposite. Is those academic elites were the highest respected people within their community, and that's not the case anymore, and they resent that.
It's part of the American ethos. It's part of the American fabric, is that we reject that stodgy intellectualism, because that was going on, and that allowed the divine right of kings. That sort of intellectual paralysis allowed what happened in Europe to happen for 4 centuries,
right.
And it allowed the oppression of people. It allowed the burning of witches. I mean,
Yeah.
it allowed what happened in Europe to transpire, and we're a reaction to that. The entire American project, and the thinking of John Locke and Hume and Montesquieu and all of those early philosophers towards financial self-determinism, that was all a response to all of that.
Right. It's fairly new in the history of humanity.
It's absolutely new.
Yeah.
When they talked about liberty in 1785, people really they would scratch their head like, "What are you talking about?"
Right.
Well, now it's really commonplace, right? Everybody was pretty enslaved in those days. Didn't matter what color you were. Didn't matter if you had chains or not. Everyone was kind of enslaved. So I look at this. I see a class battle going on.
Yep.
And you have the doers and the thinkers, and the thinkers, they don't like that the doers are successful, and the doers don't like that the thinkers seem incompetent. Your typical college professor has to call AAA to change his tire.
Yeah.
I mean, your typical college professor can't fix their toilet if it needs a flapper valve replaced.
Yeah.
As we've gotten specialized and everybody is not taking care of themselves, the more and more specialized we get, the more and more easy it is to resent the intellectual class, because they're incompetent.
Well, think of the difference, and this is why I love the West in general. Last 2-3 years, we've family vacations. We've gone to places like Idaho and Montana and Colorado, gorgeous places like that. But the difference between the East Coast, right? If you think of the city dweller in the East Coast, they like the confined areas. They like the public transportation, and this is just an observation of today's reality. They like that, right? For whatever reason,
right?
Subconsciously or consciously or whatever, where
there's comfort in it being taken care of by everybody else.
The transportation schedule is provided for you, right? And you just follow.
They let you know when to get to work.
They just follow, and you just follow along, and then you go to your high rise or whatever the case is. Us out west, again, I think a lot of this is subconsciously. We want our open spaces. Hey, I'm going to get in my car or my truck, and I'm deciding when I'm going to go drive or go where. I want my own property. I want the ability to have land to grow my own food if I want to, right? So these are all self-determination, again, consciously or subconsciously, and that's just not Arizona, but there's the entire West. So that's a part of it too that is so, it kind of dividing. You get into some of these more rural areas. It's just that's the difference in how people think.
The worst thing is that, and what I see because of the structure of higher education, you publish and you do a theory paper for your PhD, and you become you graduate to being a doctor of ideas or a doctor of some specialty. And they've spent so much time, energy, and effort getting there that very rarely do they ever rethink their theses. Very rarely do they ever rethink their specialty that gets them hired at whichever institution they end up in. So there's a disincentivization towards evolving. So what you do is you really put your roots in while you're 27 years old writing your dissertation, and then you spend the rest of your life defending the idea of a child.
Right.
Because you're a child when you do this.
If you're a poker player, it's called pot committed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So these folks are pot committed towards these theses, and they stop, their brain stops flying. It just does more and more of this cerebral cortex rationalizing about what they've already done. And they don't want to be disproven. So there's no scientific method put to people's PhDs anymore. So nobody's proving anybody wrong. Everybody just comes up with a theory and then they run a career on it.
Right.
Out here in the real world, you don't get that opportunity, because at the end of the month, you have to kind of tally up and have paid everyone in your firm, and you have to pay your customers or get rewards for their customer. So, we're out here in this real world where empiricism and results are connected to our theory. I have an intellectual side of me too. I guess what I'm going to make next year.
Right.
And I have to kind of intuit the universe a little bit. I have to listen to people. And then I sit down and kind of write out my thinking, and I theorize what I'm going to do.
And if you guys build out, hey, a new knife, then you say, hey, I think the market will love this new type of knife or new design. And if you're wrong, you've risked capital, you've risked time, and
I can ruin the whole company.
You take a loss for a year or whatever the case is. So that's risk and reward as a business person. And so that, guess what? You probably put some pretty good brain power into deciding, are we going to go with this project or not? Because you know that you have to weigh the reward versus the risk, right? Whereas, to your point, the elite institutional education people, guess what? If they're wrong, it's like they don't get disproven. They don't get challenged.
That's right.
Paycheck shows up next month.
And so they sound all sophisticated, and they've got good grammar, and they've got the right thinking, and they can quote the right people. And then your results-driven kind of capitalist out here, grammar's maybe not as important, might not sound as refined, and the two of them, their arguments don't necessarily, the academic argument always sounds better. But it almost never works better. I'm going to give you a quick example of this, and I want to get into some stuff with you.
Sure.
So I spent some time, high school and college in Massachusetts, in Western Massachusetts. I was educated in the belly of the beast around liberals. And I remember there was a water problem that a town nearby was having. And there was water coming down a mountain. It was hitting this stone, bedrock, and it was making this whole region soft and muddy. They couldn't figure out what to do. And they had all the engineers and the Army Corps of Engineers and the MIT people, and all the brains came, and millions of dollars in 10 years trying to figure out what to do. And a farmer came along and said, we need to put a pipe right over here. It needs to go right over there. And then no one could figure out how to get the equipment across. And while he said he'd do it for $100,000 and got it done in 3 days. And he said, we just need to get the water from here to there because this is all soft in the middle here.
Right.
And there's something about, and that was the American experiment. We don't need it this complicated. We don't need the Bastille. We don't need all these kings. We don't need all these lords. We can do this way simpler than it. Life's not that complicated. And there's a pragmatism at our core that we've rejected. And what I saw with Trump was a pragmatism. Minus the bombast, minus the surface that annoyed a lot of people. I just saw a pragmatism and a faith in kind of this American horse sense.
Yep.
And what I see the left coast and the East Coast lacking is just horse sense. Every single problem that we encounter in our culture, every single one I look at, I go, we could all fix all that easily.
The solution oftentimes reveals itself as actually fairly simple, and it's, what is the political path to get it done? And what President Trump did is he took a bulldozer and just plowed right through, and it pissed a lot of people off.
Yeah.
But guess what? It was effective. If you go, but look, like, regardless of where you are in the political spectrum, if you love Trump, if you're a Republican that doesn't like Trump, if you're an independent, middle of the road, if you're a moderate Democrat, anybody in that category, okay, anybody in that category can recognize today that the policies of President Trump were home runs. Anybody in that group. The only group that doesn't, the brainwashing is so blind to them, is the far, far left.
You look at it and you think, just from a soulless sons of bitches in Washington's soulless perspective, you'd think even the Democrats would go, okay, we're just going to call it,
Right.
Democrat, but let's do a lot of what he did because that was so good.
Right.
You'd think, just if they just did that, they could kind of hold on to power forever.
Yeah. Well,
they can't even acknowledge how awesome it was.
Like the border wall, which is, by the way, from a state perspective, getting back to kind of my race here, the border wall, what can be done obviously most of it is a federal issue, but as a state representative, I will, when I come January, when I win my race, I'm going to first week of session in January, going to advance a pro border security bill on the floor of the state capitol and making sure we deploy more human resources from the state perspective to just almost like a show of force, new sheriff in town, regardless of who our Republican governor is, and just say, hey, you know what, cartels, go to California, go to New Mexico, and
Anywhere but here.
make it known to the cartels. You know what? You guys want to push people across the border? Great. You go to New Mexico, you go to California, but we're going to stop it in the state of Arizona.
So I was just getting ready at the close of our last little bit to kind of circle back to this. Now, circle back is a bad phrase, but I wanted to come back to the state a little bit, and in light of all of that, what do you there's a few things you can do as a state person. You can know what's happened in the past that failed, that you could step in and reignite and maybe see if there's the energy to get that done now.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure somebody has advanced some border wall stuff at this point and it's died for whatever reason. I don't know how this state's ended up 50-50 in the House. I mean, we're pretty split in this state. A lot of rhinos.
31-29, and I forecast that after November will be 34-26 would be my guess, which will help out because there'll be less, at 31-29 every
one person can derail the
especially
whole thing.
when you have a legislator, out of Glendale that will, votes with the Democrats half the time. So, the last budget was a bipartisan budget, and we had to come back to the middle. The Republicans had to come back to the middle on a number of issues to get that passed. So I think if we can get to 34-26, we can get some more. Which I'm good at. My skills is going to be on fiscal issues. That's my background as a business owner and owning a financial planning company for 22 years. We're going to be able to get some good, I believe, some good fiscal responsible policies across.
I see in the fallout from the first Trump presidency, hopefully there's a second one, I see this weird split and a shift in the political landscape in this country. The two parties have been doing it for a long time, and in the middle, everyone is kind of reasonably the same.
Yeah.
If you poll Arizonans about abortion, we're really, really all very, very close to what we want.
Yeah.
And our politicians, if you listen to them, it sounds like we're all miles apart because they want to own the issue. They don't want to fix anything.
Right. In the terms, and I don't, abortion's not my favorite topic, but the term itself, pro-choice versus pro-life, was literally designed to create conflict. Conflict. It's
right.
I'm either this or I'm that. If you ask most Arizonans, what do you think is a reasonable policy on this issue? And this was passed in the state legislature this past session, a 15-week bill. Most people in Arizona think that's a reasonable bill.
Right. That's what I hear. I hear the whole 8 to 15 week discussion, which is, honestly, that's a really reasonable place for people to be talking.
Guess what? Here's the part about in terms of how people get so emotional, and I get it. It's super emotional. I understand it. But when you say, look, if you go to a 15-week bill where a woman can have an abortion for up to 15 weeks for any reason, they have full choice. That's 3.5 months. Guess who wrote that? The most pro-life legislator in Arizona wrote that bill. It's a pro-life bill. You have 15 weeks of a choice. That's my point is that's the type of division that's trying to be created.
Well, I actually think it's awesome to get the federal government out of it and have us all make our decisions out here where we live. I couldn't be happier with what went down.
The voters of each district get to hire the voice that can bring their thoughts and principles to the state legislature to make those policies at a local level, not a federal policy.
Right.
I mean, I couldn't be more excited about that result. If again you want to go crazy abortion rights,
not
you
because
can go to California.
Because I have an abortions right agenda.
Exactly, it's a state
just
right.
because I don't want the federal government to tell anybody what to do. I think we should do the same with guns. I think we should do the same with a lot of things.
Yeah, education.
Yeah. I want the federal government out of everything. So the fact they got slapped down on abortion, I'm like, well, that's just one thing. Hopefully it's a domino that knocks a bunch of things over.
You bet. If you go back and look again, I think you and I love American history. You go back and look at what the function of a federal government was back then. And then we come across, the late or the 20th century when we had a depression and we had 2 world wars where the size of the federal government to solve our problems, right, became a bigger part of our lives. And when those 3 major instances in the first half of the 20th century were over, and by the way, we emerged as the world power at the end,
the government didn't go.
The federal government says, okay, states, here you go. Here's your power back. They hung on to it. And big part of that's the income tax.
Let's talk a little bit about some issues then. Tell me about the big 3. Let's talk about low-hanging fruit, okay? What are the big 3 things that you want to bring to the office that day one, have you already been putting positions together on certain things that you want to bring? Have you already been meeting with legislators who have things kind of in the works?
You bet.
Give me an idea.
Yeah. So there's my 3 big issues. Number 1 is border.
Okay.
And again, just theoretically, my strategy there is a show of force, a show of strength. President Reagan, who's my favorite of all time, taught me and taught us that peace through strength. If you show force, the results of that will be less military or conflict. So let's just show force on our southern border and dissuade our opposition from coming across this border, here in Arizona. So that's number 1. Number 2, as an economics guy, is I want to make Arizona the 9th state in America with a 0% state income tax. If we have a thriving business community, which we do, and we put, 30% of the state budget is derived from the state income tax, which equates to about $3.8 billion. If we take that $3.8 billion and put it back into the pockets with liberty of our hardworking citizens that earn income, put that money back into their pockets, what are they going to do, Greg?
Love it. They're going to reinvest in the communities. They're going to buy bigger houses.
They're going to spend it. And guess what? Sales tax 5.5%. So you're going to recreate that same dollar income stream, but you're going to do so with liberty versus, why an income tax is punitive. It dissuades good economic behavior. So that's number 2. And then number 3 is I'm going to be on the front lines of the education conflict.
Okay, we're going to talk about education in a minute. Let's back up. The wall, there's limited power at the state level from a state rep to jump in on that, okay? But there's clearly some consensus. I was just down yesterday on the southern border. Saturday. I went down to the southern border, and I did a little political rally speech, and there was right on the other side of the border is a little hill, and up on top of the hill, you get some binoculars. You can see there's a Mexican guy up there. He's with radios. He's telling the Mexicans where the police are, where law enforcement is, so that they can avoid them as they come across the border. While we pulled up the road, there was a vehicle pulled over that had big bales of drugs. I mean,
you can see this?
Yeah. It's madness down there. Everyone thinks it's hyperbole, but if you go down there, it's fucking crazy. Yeah. It's bananas what's going on.
This fentanyl issue, this is starting to wake people up. We had a young man in our community in Arcadia who was 18 years old. He had a super, super bright future ahead of him. And his family was going to go on vacation, and he took a Xanax, just a regular Xanax. A lot of people do that. Woke up dead the next day because it was laced with fentanyl.
How is that happening?
This is happening, and these are issues. And by the way, we can't stop all drug smuggling, but this is one that if people decide, you know what, that's an issue worth fighting for, then we can address it. But guess what? The people on the left, they don't want to hear it. They're brainwashed.
I'm a lunatic, but we've got all these A-10 warthogs sitting around. We could have a couple flights of those just running the American border and just basically taking out targets of opportunity within 1 mile of the border that you see that look like a train of this. Yep. And this would all be over tomorrow.
Yep.
We don't have the will to do stuff anymore. So at the state legislative level, hopefully Kerry Lake gets in. I think at that point we're going to have a you say radical, but we're just going to have exceedingly pro-America, pro-Arizona, put the wall up, enforce the damn law kind of governor,
Yep.
and then you intend to support that kind of action, I think, pretty heavily.
Without question, yeah.
So on the political landscape I was talking about, since Trump has split the Republican Party, it's tearing the Republican Party. So you have what I would call the classic Republicans, which I found them unoffensive, but I found them certainly uninteresting and not really pro-American. They were pro-business. And pro-business and pro-America used to be so overlapping that was enough. But with the globalism and the internationalism of manufacturing that's taken place, pro-business now can mean a lot of things. It makes me a little spooked out. Pro-Disney is kind of starting to be Marxist, LGBTQ oriented.
It's getting murky.
It is.
Yep.
So what you're seeing is the people of the Republican Party splitting off, and there's turning out to be an America Party and then two elitist parties. And the America Party it's the Kerry Lakes and Lamans and these folks that are radically America first, which is really kind of the Trumpian wing of the party.
Yeah.
Where are you in that spectrum?
Yeah, this is what my favorite topic, because I bring a completely different viewpoint than probably any politician in Arizona that you've talked to. Because when I decided to get in this race a year ago, and I've been a lifelong Republican, I've followed Arizona local politics like a nerd, like most people don't, right? That, pretty closely. I didn't realize quite heavily of the Civil War, of what you just talked about inside the Republican Party that I was walking into. And I would go back, say maybe 10 years ago, and I would have called myself a complete classic Republican. I've always been a Republican. I love low taxes. Again, kind of a business Republican guy. Definitely would have considered myself that. In 2016, I was fully behind Marco Rubio in the primary. Didn't really kind of embrace Trump until, weeks before the election. And what the movement of President Trump taught me in 2016 is that there is this group of Americans that have completely felt abandoned by their representatives. And they just got so disenfranchised that they just kind of gave up. And President Trump spoke to that crowd and said, every man and woman in America that works hard is going to be representative. And I'm going to carry the flag for you. President Trump was a billionaire, right? And he was the hero of the working class. Think about that.
It's so bizarre. A New Yorker in a suit.
That's right. Like some guy in Arkansas and Iowa is like, that's my guy.
Who works at a potato chip factory.
That's right.
He's his guy. I think it's amazing.
It's fascinating. But to get to your point, where I stand in that is, Greg, everywhere I've gone in my life, I would tell you the defining characteristic that I've had has been leadership. And I see a vacuum here of leadership at the state capitol needed. And if you look at whether it be Rusty Bowers and where he's at in terms of how others think of him, given his previous leadership capabilities, or just the fact that come January, you're going to have 60% of that House and that Senate brand new, whether it be brand just elected or they took over.
Because there is a big throw the bums out thing right now.
Yeah, just a lot of people are not rerunning. A lot of people retired. By the way, last session, there was like 10 people that just simply resigned. So you're going to have this vacuum, and I believe one of my goals is to go in and try and heal some of these wounds within the Republican Party, because I'm the political outsider in my case. I don't have the legacy allegiance to either side of that Republican Party. I don't have like in my race, I've got opponents. One's aligned 100% with Governor Ducey. And then the other two are completely aligned with Nancy Bartow and more of the right wing, harder right or Trump crowd. I appeal to both sides. I can speak to both sides. I communicate and have the belief system of both sides. And I know in today's world, everyone wants to get divisive, even within the Republican Party. They want that divisiveness. I believe in both sides, and I'm going to always be America first. So if that's a defining characteristic, I'm going to be more on the America first side of the equation. But I believe I'm going to be able to provide some leadership by saying, hey, everybody, we don't have to hate each other. The Democrats, the liberals, are the ones we need to beat, not each other. And I definitely get and understand the grievances on both sides of this, and I also understand the positives of both, so I can bring them together. I believe
one of the things your voters in particular. I'm from your, I grew up in your district, that district. I was 32nd at Shea,
Yep,
and then 65th Street and Cactus. That's
right in the wheelhouse, right there. Yeah.
One of the things that has just annoyed me the most is these conservatives that I vote for over the years who side with Democrats. And Democrats aren't wrong 100% of the time, but they are 100% wrong in their solutions.
Yeah.
So it's easy for me to dismiss them. I'm sick of rhinos. I'm sick of people who say they're conservatives. And then I couldn't stand John McCain. I couldn't stand his dumb policies, his maverick status, any of that. I thought he was awful. I just thought he was an elitist big government guy. That was all I could get out of him. He was, and it's exactly what I expect of a field grade naval officer. Big organization, big trust in the big machine.
Interesting, yeah.
And I didn't like him at all. It's not what I wanted out of my conservatives. I'm sick of conservatives, people who say they're conservatives, who are pro big government.
Yeah.
And I'm sick of folks talking about reasonable gun laws. I'm sick of folks talking, I want my state Congress, I want them to make an amendment to the Arizona Constitution that no state or municipal money in law enforcement can be spent funding or supporting any law enforcement action from the federal government that is anti-Second Amendment.
Sure.
So talk to me. Those are some of the major concerns of us Arizonans and our native. I'm a native. My dad's a native. Second Amendment. We're here because it's free.
Absolutely. So the Second Amendment is a big issue. Obviously, every time we see one of these tragedies, the call for restrictions comes down. I'm a massive Second Amendment person, and I am because of issues that go much further than what we see when it comes to being able to the normal Second Amendment theory is I should have the right to bear a weapon to protect my family against danger, intruders, and so forth, which is absolutely true. I should. But
that's a secondary.
Yeah, it goes before that. And the reason why we've had 247 years of the greatest country on earth is because we have the ability, it was written into our original documents, that the right to bear these weapons was originally intended, and by the way, it has worked, it's been proven correct, is for us to be able to defend ourselves as a people against an oppressive government. That's first and foremost. And I know,
right.
And I know some people roll their eyes at that in 2022, but guess what, guys? We've got evidence that it works.
Right.
You cannot dismiss the evidence of the growth that we are, beside things that happen that we don't like. We are the most successful nation in the history of mankind. And it's because of that Second Amendment.
And the government wants in on everything. And right. Anybody who's been around knows at some point, every piece of radical power-grabbing legislation, at some point when it's in committee and they're sitting across from each other, the representatives from the left and the right, somebody says, well, how's the congressman from New York, how do you suggest we go in 330 million homes and take all those back? How do you
right.
think we ought to do that?
Right.
You think, how many law enforcement people from Kentucky you think want to go to these armed homes and do this?
Yeah.
That conversation happens.
Oh yeah. It's actually
that's a real thing. It's an
fun
insulator.
Theater. It's fun theater. Yeah.
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 Because that, I call it the gun grab in this country is very different than the gun grab in Australia.
Yeah. The interesting thing I think that happened with the Second Amendment, and I actually personally saw it because I saw fear and confusion in a liberal's eyes at Bass Pro Shop when I was getting 9mm ammunition about 2 years ago, is that during the summer of 2020, more independent and far left Democrats went to go buy a firearm than, if you look at the firearm sales in America, in your guys' industry, obviously,
crazy.
It. And guess what? Most of the Republicans already had guns, right? So who is that? Who is it that
it was Democrats buying
right.
guns?
And so
because I hope I don't run into anybody.
Nobody can see me, right?
Yeah,
right. So the virtue signaling, don't. Hopefully no one sees me. But so I think when it comes down to, it's one of those issues of what looks good in the press, but in the American home. The idea of protecting one another and protecting yourself against whether it be an intruder or the government has never been more alive than today. And unfortunately, when we have, like you said, 330 million Americans, you have two things that are really trying to drive this narrative. Number one, and then just that's different than, say, 50 years ago. Number one is just population growth. Bad things are going to happen, and that's just part of human nature, and I hate it. We all hate it. It's ugly, but it happens, okay? And I don't want it to ever happen. But the more people you have, the more risk and bad things are going to happen. It's just law of large numbers. And then couple that with the fact that everything we do, every bad thing that happens is going to be sensationalized because we see it all on video camera. We have, literally 250 million video cameras all over America. And so that is different and new today than it had been in the history of this country. And so those two things are being used to brainwash Americans into what they think happens. If you look at the actual data, if you look at the actual statistics, they're going to, again, bear to, terrible things happen and we see it and it makes us not feel good. However, statistically, if you go back in the history of our country, these bad occurrences have always been there on a percentage of what the population is. It just doesn't feel as good today.
You got to read Freakonomics if you haven't read it, because it talks about like it being the safest time in all of human history.
Life expectancy is beyond, it's off the charts. And the other thing too is, and I don't want to be cavalier here, is we all gauge risk on what in danger to ourselves, and then we decide to make our choices, whether it be consciously or subconsciously. So as an example, car accidents, I don't have the exact number, car accident deaths outweigh firearm deaths in this country. I don't know the exact number, but it's 10 to 1 or whatever.
It's a gigantic.
It's probably
amount.
more higher than 10 to 1, right? But we all say, you know what, I'm getting in my car today to go to work, or we all take our kids to school in those cars, even though the risk is higher, because we don't think the risk is high enough where it's going to dissuade me from that activity. And so, but the math is not portrayed in the media that way, and we see the big the big ugly thing, because it's terrible, and these are real lives, and these are real families, and people want solutions. And I'm right there, by the way. I want solutions too. I do think that there are things we can do, but it's not the guns, it's the people,
right?
And we have a mental health crisis in this country.
I agree.
And we're just, I would say good news, bad news. And I have a good buddy of mine who owns a mental health company. And so I get firsthand data on what's happening. And the good news is that as a society, we are recognizing this. It's harder to recognize than a physical problem. We're continuing to recognize it. The stigma of it is being reduced, which is good. But it's just harder to determine and harder to be accepted nationwide. If I go into the doctor, like, hey doc, my arm hurts, I fell over and my arm hurts, they do an x-ray and they see the bone break, it's indisputable what happened.
Right.
I broke my arm, here's what we do to fix it.
There's not a hard fix on the mental stuff.
It's just because it's murky on what does this mean, what does that say. I think we're moving in a direction, and I think this will vastly improve society, of saying, okay, let's recognize these issues and then we can address them, But you have to be careful because of liberty and overstepping, but that's going to help us.
People talk a lot about, I get asked all the time, what would you do about the violence in schools? What would you do about the violence of the young generation? What would you do about all these things? And I tell people all the time, we have a vacuum of masculinity in this country. We have phony masculinity that we worship on the weekends playing sports, and we have a vacuum of daily masculinity because we've been emasculated and under the guise of equality by a bunch of angry, purple-haired, vagina hat-wearing lesbians. And what the country needs, what every family needs, what every kid who's going to be in prison 5 years from now needs, is a stern man in his life.
That's right.
Not a violent, angry man, not a raging man, but a stern man in his life. This country has a man problem. While we've been wearing skinny jeans and trying to appeal to the softer nature of television women, real women don't actually want that man.
Right.
And you see these guys wearing their little man buns on top of their head. Yeah, I hear so many stories about guys who don't have jobs. They kind of have girls with jobs, and they kind of hang out and tinker at the house. These are not the men that are good for this country.
Humanity. I look at a lot of issues that we face today through the lens of the history of humanity and the difference in how, men and women and the difference were designed for thousands of years since the history of mankind. The major, role of the male had been protection and providing for a family. And that is not something that we just decided to do thousands of years ago. It was just a natural innate evolution of how that worked. And you're seeing a generation of people, like you said, are being told that they're pigs if they continue the trend of human history.
Jordan Peterson makes this point that being a soft, peaceful male is not noble. He says you should be a ferocious, fearsome creature who chooses to be gentle. Yeah. There's virtue in that, but there's no virtue in being gentle.
For the audience, Greg's wearing a hat right now that says "Lions Not Sheep."
So, we can see what's coming. When the state gets heavily involved with the family disintegrates and the family goes into chaos. Black Americans, after the Reconstruction period, had higher rates of marriage. They had higher rates of literacy. They had higher rates of education than whites did. And with the civil rights movement and the change that happened in our society, the engagement of the government into the black society in this country has destroyed their culture. And they're trying to come to grips with that, and everyone thinks it's because of racism. And you can just graph it out. You can see as the government gets involved in the African American family fails.
Right.
And as the government gets involved in the white family, we will fail too.
That's right. And they're trying to do it. And
they are. They're in the midst of it right now. You want to know what's happening with all these fentanyl zombies, these kids getting all freaked out? The government's disintegrating families. They kill God, they kill the family, they kill the country. Yeah. So let me ask you about solutions. We got to our third item on the list was education.
Yep. Chat
with me a little bit about education and what you want to do. I mean, I think we all kind of know probably where you're at. If Carrie Lake wants to put the remaining piece of the wall up that's all sitting in piles down by the border,
yep.
You would support
for sure
funding for that.
Yeah, there's 19 miles of state land that's actually, this past legislature actually just funded it, where there's 19 miles of state land that was funded and legally we can put the wall up on. Now that's a big border, but you know what? Every time we can take out 19 miles, we're reducing choke points, which means we can put our physical, our human,
you can force resources,
human resources to the other gaps.
And then your second issue after that, what was your second thing?
Taxation, state income tax.
Okay, and so you had talked about 3.5 billion of the budget was generated from that state income tax. Correct. Of their annual budget. Where do you make up for that 3.5 billion? Because if you collect, let's say everybody went out and bought cars tomorrow with the 3.5 billion, the 8% tax from that would be way less than the 3.5 billion. So
no, it would be higher. So
how is that possible? So if you take 8% of 3.5 billion, you only get 8%.
Right. Well, right now that $3.8 billion, okay, that's being generated, is being generated off 2.5% state income tax. Okay. So if you take that $3.8 billion, put it back into our pockets. So it was taxed at 2.5%. Okay. So if we put it back into our pockets,
I see what you're saying.
It's going to go to the sales tax.
The 3.5 billion won't turn into it. Will, instead of collecting 3.5 billion, you'll get 5.4 billion or whatever.
And then I say that it'll be less than that actually, because not all of it's going to be spent on consumer products or whatever the case is. But that's a big part of where we can bring that to play. Then also the other piece of that,
because people don't go put it in the bank.
Well, exactly.
That's all amount to.
Well, some do, or invest it, or buy real estate, or whatever the case is.
But productive things,
yes,
not government things.
Right. Most of it's going to be spent.
Do you think the legislature will go along with that?
I think ultimately that's where we're trying to get. And I think if you look at the pattern of that income tax, where it's gone, that's where I think the trend line is.
Okay, pause. Let's jump into the third one then.
Yep.
Let's jump into education then. At the state legislator level, tell us what you want to do with education.
Yeah, so this is a big thing. My wife was my wife was a school teacher. She was a Democrat from Michigan. We sat on our couch in 2008, November.
Did you fix her?
I did.
Okay.
So by 2012.
All right, wife, if you're listening, he's just kidding about that. We're just funning.
Oh, she'll be the first one to tell you. I mean, and by the way, I shout out to Allison, my wife. for
What's
anybody,
up, Allison?
yeah, for anybody that doesn't know what it's like to run for a public office, from a perspective of time, taking shit from people. We have 4 kids, what it takes. Allison, my wife, has been an absolute rock star. I mean, as yesterday, she was making 2 hours worth of cold calls on a Sunday afternoon. Just absolutely a rock star in helping, and because she knows the difference. And education is her big issue because she was a teacher and she understands and sees the difference. Now, where we live in Scottsdale. And number one is I'm a total advocate. I'm going to sound like I'm contradicting here, but I'm not. I'm a total advocate of school choice. And our kids go to a Great Hearts school, which is a charter school that is awesome. And if anybody from the left wants to talk about how school choice, like, hey, no, it shouldn't be about the kids and the parents. It should be about the teachers and the institutions. I would ask them to look in the mirror and say, who are we trying to serve here? It's the children, not the institutions of education. It's the kids and the parents. They just need to, the public schools just simply need to compete better. That's it. And I want to be part of the solution to help those public schools compete better. And to do that, number one is they have to realize that they're actually in competition. I've been very in-depth through my charity work with the Scottsdale Charros with SUSD, and I'm a huge advocate for SUSD. I want to help them turn the corner and understand the time period of monopoly on education is over.
Let me just frame this a little bit for some of our viewers and listeners. So Arizona, we just passed even more aggressive legislation this year for money goes with the kid.
Follows the backpack.
It's, yeah, what's that?
They said the money follows the
money
backpack.
follows the backpack. So what that means, it's a change of phraseology. So there's been this either you're for schools or against schools mentality. And in Arizona, we have a school charter system. So your money, a certain component of your money has been able to travel with your kid to go to these little charter schools, which are private institutions where your public funding that goes to your student in your neighborhood, if your kid doesn't go to the public school and goes to one of these schools, the dollars follow. But it's been a component of that.
That's right.
Now it's a much bigger component. They're getting close to all the money.
Well, basically what just happened is the difference this past session was that it's about $7,000 per kid is the difference.
And I think there's about 12,000 all total per kid in between municipal, state, and federal dollars that go to a
That's right.
kid.
So the charter schools don't get the municipality money. That stays at the public school level. But the state money, so in Arizona, of the 12, if you have a charter school, you get the 7,000. And so now the law just changed where now if you want to put your kid in private school, okay, but you couldn't otherwise afford it, now you get to take that state $7,000 and allocate it towards private school. And there's no better evidence, Greg, of the success of this system than in Maryvale. Maryvale, traditionally in the public schools, have just had horrendous graduation rates, just horrendous graduation rates. Well, the charter school, the Great Heart School in there, just graduated a senior class with 100% graduation rate. Inside in the toughest areas. So the notion that the school choice and the charter school system is only pandering to the affluent and those kids are going to do well anyways, that's not the case. If you go look at some studies in New York and you look in Harlem, some of the success of charter schools in Harlem, it's mind-blowing.
And they want to shut them all down.
Right. Because guess what? They don't get the state education system doesn't get the control. The institution does. And guess what? If you provide a better service than the competition, you're going to get the customers.
The teachers unions are racketeering for the Democratic Party. It's all it is. Yep. They want a permanent base of mandatory donors who get a paycheck mandatory deduction taken each week, each pay period.
That's right.
That goes straight into the National Teachers Association or the union, teachers union, and then that goes almost 100% exclusively into the Democratic Party.
That's right. It's so interesting. I'm going to have a most wanted poster with my head on it from the teachers unions. When I get through this primary, that's going to be an issue I'm going to take on. And I'd like to make it super crystal clear right now in your show, Greg. I am 100% pro teacher. They had one of the areas in education I want to improve upon. By the way, I'm taking the legs out of my Democratic opponent come November by saying this. Teachers in Arizona need to get paid more. And I have a plan on how we can do that without raising taxes.
Well, they already collect enough money to pay them well. They just blow the money in stupid ways.
That's right.
You know, I heard there's 80 some odd superintendents in Phoenix alone. all make $250,000 a year or more.
That's right. If you look at the pitch line of the growth of compensation of administrators versus school teachers, it's like 3 times the growth rate.
Same as hospitals.
Right. Do you want to know, Greg, how much the average teacher, let's just say you're 23, you went to my alma mater, NAU, wanted to be a teacher, you're 23, you get into teaching, you have, and you maybe make $45,000 roughly starting salary in Arizona. You have 12.5% come out of your paycheck, not taxes. You don't have a choice. It goes to the pension program.
That's
in no other industry. In your privatizing, if you have a private government, I mean, maybe that 23-year-old wants to go teach for 5 years and go on and do something else, which happens in our American society. It's not the 50s anymore where you're going to work.
right.
It's just the reality of it.
Stay there forever, yeah.
But so one of the areas that I can put more money back in teachers' pockets is by making that pension obligation, make it optional. I come from the financial advising and services industry. I understand the math and how that can work. Guess who's against that? The unions. Because that's power. That's money that they put.
They get the financial institutions in their pocket because they get to sway where that money goes.
Exactly. And it's legal. They get to lend that money out.
It's legal. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right.
That's right. And the average teacher doesn't understand that. Oh, by the way, I would ask those teachers unions, or the teachers, of course the unions won't tell them this, how many jobs they've lost in the last 10 years because of the policies. And guess what's going to happen over the next 10 years? They're going to think about that. The unions themselves, which should be creating jobs for their constituents, because of their policies, they're literally reducing jobs because the end customer, the family, is deciding to go to a private institution.
They're making an end run on them. You know, the problem is because the union is so bad and so corrupt, and so powerful, Arizona's made an end run on the unions.
Yep.
With the charter school system.
And that's right. And so you're starting to see a reduction in those teacher jobs, those union dues teacher jobs.
If enough people bail on the public system, the system doesn't need to grow. And then new developments, they know that 37.9% to go to charter school, and then in 10 years from now it's 62.4%.
That's right.
They make less schools, and you know what? Better for all of us. Well, private industry at work.
I love competition and everything because you should get better results of it. Is my goal, and I'm again a huge public school advocate. I think there's a role in it. I think it's important. It just needs to be done the right way, and they need to, in my opinion, recognize they're in a competitive situation. If they operate in a certain way that they think is ideologically correct, but against what the beliefs of their end customers are, which are Arizona families, they're going to continue to cannibalize their own agenda because they're going to have less people. People are voting with their feet. So my goal in our district is to get SUSD to understand. I mean, if you've been watching the news, and in fact, shortcomings of SUSD have been in national news in the last 12 months.
This has to do with the
school board president basically creating private witch hunts on parents within the district, and then also pushing a woke agenda on kids inside the school. And this is every time one of those stories gets public, another 50 families decide to leave because they don't want their kids being pushed that woke radical agenda. I just want them to understand the job, and what we want them to do, and what is a great need for society is to teach our kids excellence in reading and writing and math.
And so what do you do at the state legislator level?
Well, there's legislation level. That what I want to do is to be able to create penalties for districts that violate this agenda. And so put rules and laws in place that say, listen, we want you to teach our kids certain subjects. We want to make sure that everything that's being taught in the classroom, everything is transparent. I mean, literally, who would be against that? And there's already works with that in play. But then if you violate that as a teacher, what happened is that you no longer have that job.
Well, that's the thing. The accountability. I think our country is perfect and needs nothing. It has zero accountability.
Right.
So you take a country like ours that has so much potential and add zero accountability, and the whole thing's coming off the rails.
Right.
If you added if congressmen got put in jail for making money off their job, this whole country would be fixed in 5 minutes.
don't get me started on that whole issue. It's a national issue, but again, I feel like it embodies me because it's the Nancy Pelosi and her husband. It's a confluence of two of my worlds: politics, which I'm getting into, and then also financial advising and stock trading, which has been my career for 22 years, and the racketeering that has occurred at this level, and it's legal, by the way, in the American eye, it's basically created its own monster because, and I'm just going to use Nancy Pelosi because she's so easy to pick on, is that for 25 years, Nancy Pelosi has accumulated massive amounts of wealth through stock trading. That's 100% legal.
Just insider trading.
Insider trading. And so as a result, it's in my world, in my industry, I'd be in jail right now if I did what Nancy, 100%. I'd be in jail if I did what Nancy Pelosi does. Is if I got information on a stock.
She gets privy information and she's privy to how rulings are going to go down.
Exactly. And not only does she not go to jail, she actually gets political rewards for it because she has created this wealth, of which then she has used in California politics to push and basically, and this is how political power works, help others, of which then they're going to owe her favors. And so as a result, she has fortified her position of making the exact thing that created that power from ever dissipating because she now has a moat around the policy. So the people, she's just anybody that thinks right and wrong. Like if you're an American in Arizona and you think right and wrong, the fact that politicians get to trade and make profits on insider trading, but you, Mr. and Mrs. Citizen, you do not get to do that, okay? I mean, that is the ultimate abuse of power. But guess what? We all would want it. Literally every hardcore Democrat in America, I could think, if you didn't put names into it, if you didn't put Nancy Pelosi's name to it, would agree with that is not right.
Right.
But guess what? Is it going to change? Well, it takes the majority. It's going to take the majority of people that benefit. And by the way, there's Republicans that do this too. It's going to take the majority of the people that benefit from it to decide I'm going to limit my own political power. Right. So that's a tough one.
Okay, I think we see where you're coming from. Talk to us a little bit about your strategy and your campaign, where it sits right now, and we'll wrap up because I know you got things to do.
Yep, you got to appreciate that, Greg, for this opportunity, first of all. So tomorrow is primary election day. I'm in a very competitive primary. Our campaign's either been number 1 or number 2 in fundraising, our petition signatures, every step and checkpoint along the way. We're running an America First political outsider campaign. We're going to I think that people, particularly in my district, are sick and tired of politics as usual. We're sick and tired of sending the same everyday politicians down to the Capitol representative. The John Arnold campaign for the State House in LD4. If you're listening today and you haven't voted yet and you're going down to the polls on Tuesday, just know this. Our campaign, me personally, I'm going to take accountability and say I'm going to represent the people that want liberty, an America First and Arizona First agenda. I am not going to be beholden to any lobbyist, political action committee. Greg, if you look at the fundraising of the main contenders in my race, you'll see $0. We've raised $188,000. 0 of that is PAC money. 0 of that is lobbyist money. You look at my competitors and the percentage that they've raised in that arena, it is like half the money. Okay. I don't have to answer to one side, as we discussed before, of the Republican Party or the other. I get to vote because I'm not beholden to anybody. I'm not beholden to the Ducey McCain side. I'm not beholden to the Trump side. I can talk and communicate, and I can work and be an America First, Arizona First representative and work with both sides of that. I can be that unifier that doesn't have an allegiance. I don't owe favors to anybody. I get to represent the people of our district with liberty and liberty in mind.
And in the group, I think there's 6 people running, right?
Yep.
And that's a hard place to poll. It's a hard race to poll.
Yep.
What's your gut tell you where you are in this standing right now?
My gut tells me, based on the information we have in different polls, which again is tough, is that we are neck and neck for second place. And we think we have a slight edge on second place right now, and the top 2 go.
So give me an idea, because we're all going to vote. I mean, I'm a live voting person. I never do it on paper. Yep. So who we got Matt. Who's your main competition that you feel like?
Well, so if you look at the competition, there's 6 of us. We feel, based on a strong fundraising effort, Matt Gress is likely going to get the number 1 spot. And then we think that the number 2 spot is going to be between myself, Maria Sims, and Vera Gibran. And we think we're slightly ahead there. but you never know. I mean, I'm grinding this thing out. I was out knocking doors yesterday in the 100-degree heat for 6 hours. Couple, between you and 2 other radio shows, we're going to be talking to voters here in the next 2 days. We're going to be out talking to voters all night tonight. So we're taking it all the way to the edge.
I don't like Matt Gress. I hope he gets thrown out. I think he's a douchey. I think he's a Doug Douchey acolyte. I don't like where his money comes from. I don't like how much money he's spent. I don't like he's a goddamn carpetbagger from upstate New York. I don't like how smooth he is. There's a whole bunch I don't like about him, and he's run some real negative campaigns against other people in the race, and I just think he's a piece of trash. I hope Arizona throws his ass out and he goes back to New York. Him and his boyfriend. They all kiss my ass.
I think he's technically from Oklahoma. But,
no, he's upstate New York. He's from Syracuse.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in the middle there someplace. Points unknown, but
sure.
At least that's what he said when he was talking the other night.
Well, I tell you what, we are. It's going to be a hard race. I can tell you that. And we've got 36 hours to go here, Greg, and certainly appreciate being on the show. And I can tell you this, that if elected, when elected, I'm going to be leading. No lobbyist is going to have my vote. An America First, Arizona First, liberty-driven agenda, border security, get woke crap out of our education system, eliminate the state income tax, make sure that we increase laws on the book in the next session on election security, which, by the way, we didn't touch on that, but I'll just say this. This is not a crime of passion, election fraud. It is a crime. It's a premeditated crime. And right now in Arizona, it's a class 5 felony. And even people that are getting convicted from 2020 are not going to jail. So what the main issue I want to bring to forefront is to vastly increase the penalties on election fraud and deter the activity and the action. That's one of my biggest things. Nobody's talking about that. Basically we need to take people to prison.
Accountability.
It goes back to accountability. Yeah. And by the way, the deterrence the actual penalty will deter the action.
It'll put downward pressure on it.
Downward pressure, anyways. Yeah. When Uncle Source comes and talks to these people and say, "Hey, we need you to go cheat for the team," and somebody says, "Well, what happens if I get caught, Mr. Soros?" And he's like, "Don't worry about it. You won't go to jail." Oh, okay, I'll go cheat. But guess what? If it's 5 years minimum, not going to do it as much. Yeah. So that we deter that activity that way. That's going to be a major one. And then, getting the voter rolls cleaned up, and I don't know how it happened, that's going to be another area. So, Greg, you would not believe how many houses, again, I've been out there, I was number 2 in fundraising, but I also worked harder than anybody. I can tell you that 100%. Nobody put more blood and sweat into this race on the streets than I did in the last 12 months. I have knocked on, I've probably met over 1,500 to 2,000 of our voters personally. And what I've heard is I had one gentleman tell me that he has always, like yourself, always voted at the polls. He never once asked for a ballot to be mailed to his house. In 2020, he got 4 ballots sent to his house with his name on it. So it was his name, 4 ballots. Okay, how the heck does that happen? So he calls up and he said, "Hey guys, this is what happened to the county recorders." So what happens in 2022? He told me he got 2 more. So cleaning up those voter rolls is like actually figuring this problem out. Do you know that in private business with technology that we have, databases, analysis, this type of, it's not voter ballots, but it's other types of, like, whether it be mail or marketing.
Just lists.
Companies do this all the time, and they control their data. They control how this happens. You want to know why? It's because they lose money if they don't do it efficiently. Right. So that we have, as a society, the technology to clean this stuff up. Why hasn't it happened yet? I'm not sure. But I tell you what, Greg, tomorrow, August 2nd, if I get voted in, when I get voted in by the constituents of our district, I will figure it out. And that you can count on.
All right, John Arnold, thanks for being here. If people want to go to your website and read about you and find out a little more before they go to the polls, tell us your website.
Yeah, appreciate that. So it's johnarnoldforaz.com. And so if there's anybody out there listening wants to see my platform that lives in Arizona, is still thinking about that last vote for the State House, I encourage you to go there. And if you're out there in somewhere else in this great nation of America where you like what you've heard and you want to help support a candidate that is going to push back against the woke radical left, any fundraising efforts and contributions would obviously be appreciated. JohnArnoldForAZ.com. Greg, Really appreciate you having me in here. This is what I love to do, is talk about America and liberty. And let me tell you, I'm going to leave the audience with this. If there's somebody out there that can vote in the AZ LD4 race, I'm asking for your vote. And let me tell you this. I'm asking you to put me into the state legislature so I can do the one thing that I was born to do, and that is fight liberals. Cannot wait for that honor. Greg, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. Hey, sports fans, that's the show here on this, I don't know, whatever it is, happy Monday, day before primary. I think this show's going to actually go up today, which is real rare for us. Usually there's a big lag, so we'll see how the editing goes, if there's an editing that needs to be done. Thanks for being here. Appreciate y'all being part of this great American project. We will see you next time. Don't forget, check us out. The Greg Medford Show, Spotify, iTunes, Rumble. You can also check us out on my YouTube channel still, over at my Medford Knife YouTube channel. Anyways, I'm out.